If you're trying to understand the scope of what happened on Election Day, this map is a good place to start. More than 90% of America's counties shifted toward Donald Trump. You saw areas all across the country, from battleground states to urban areas to rural areas, almost uniformly shift to the right and embrace Donald Trump. That shows an electorate that was rejecting the current administration and delivering a rebuke to the Democratic Party. There were a lot of signs of the Democratic Party's unpopularity and Joe Biden's unpopularity specifically for a long time. I was frankly fairly shocked when the Democrats rallied around Biden in the early stages of 2023, when a lot of the evidence pointed to a country that thought he was too old to serve a second term and that he was unpopular because of things like inflation. And at the time, we basically heard the party dismiss those concerns. When it became clear that a lot of Americans were blaming the Biden administration for the rise in prices, the reaction from the president and the vice president was to lecture folks out of their concerns, to tell them that economic indicators showed a good economy, thinking they would move the sentiment rather than acknowledge the sentiment and respond to it. And when you look at the results on Tuesday, you can see how that just didn't work. The lack of a primary also ended up being a huge point of contention. One thing that happens in a primary is the candidate is forced to articulate their vision in relationship to other members of their party, and that forces a sense of clarity that I think is helpful in terms of getting to know a specific candidate. In not holding a primary process, Democrats did a couple things. They tied themselves to the status quo in this administration, and even more so than that, they deprived themselves of the ability to bring in new voices and have them have an open debate about what the party stands for on key issues like the economy, crime, immigration, abortion rights. These are all things that the Democrats needed to have a new conversation about.
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
After the candidate switch, there was a big outpouring of support for Kamala Harris. What she provided was a breath of fresh air. You saw that taper out after the DNC and the time after, and I partially think that's because the message coming from the candidate and the campaign was not really one of change. They made a kind of intentional choice to appeal to more moderate Republicans and cast themselves as a sort of continuation of the Biden administration, not laying out their differences on big issues that folks had, like the economy, immigration, or the war in Gaza.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind.
So as we got closer and closer to Election Day, more and more voters started feeling like Harris was a representation of the Democratic Party as it was, and not a new way forward as she had promised to be. It's also really clear that Democrats have just lost touch with certain portions of their base, particularly working class portions of their base, and that cuts across different demographic groups. I really think this is an impact of an idea that's had roots in the Democratic Party all the way dating back to the Obama era, that the change in demographics in the country, the rise of Black, Latino, Asian, Arab Americans, would lead to an electorate that was inherently more liberal. That assumption has been proven false time and time again. And I think it's important to note that when Democrats talk about democracy, they usually are only talking about the things that Donald Trump does bad. But for a lot of folks, they don't really like how things are going right now. So because of that, they were prioritizing a desire for change over their fear of Trump. I think that is kind of what this map speaks to. A Democratic Party that represented the status quo and a country who frankly didn't want it.